Gatorade was on sale at Safeway for 89 cents a 32-ounce bottle, and Mr. D's, just along Main, had knocked down country-style ribs to $1.39 a pound. The school district and the Gannett Grill needed cooks. It was Thursday, July 24, 1997, in Lander, Wyoming, and the twice-weekly State Journal had thunked onto porches the afternoon before. Its lead story, Police Chief Dick Cura was pressing the city council to crack down on street parties. Jesse Emerson of the Spirit Freedom Ministries would speak that evening about family alcoholism and drugs. Here was a one-bedroom apartment for rent, $350 plus utilities. No pets. It would be lip-cracking dry, under a ferociously blue sky. Clouds big as counties would bunch up to the northeast, where the Owl Creek Mountains meet the Bighorns, and just west, in the Wind River Range, Lander's backyard. They might shape themselves into massive anvils and shoot lightning down to the high plains. To all appearances, it was going to be a spectacularly ordinary high summer day. What happened instead was something strange and nightmarish, the kind of nightmare that begins with innocuous moments that become harrowing only in hindsight. A casual goodbye kiss. 3 quick glances at a wristwatch. A cheery wave. It would be the day that a Lander resident named Amy Wroe Bechtel, 24 years old, 5'6" and 110 pounds, Olympic marathon hopeful, amateur photographer, friend, employee, daughter, sister, wife, fell off the face of the earth. At the northwestern edge of Lander, past the Toyota dealership, on a rise above the tidy town, 10 identical frame houses face the Wind River Range. Small and scraped looking, former company houses from some gone bust outfit in Rock Springs, they line one side of a street called Lucky Lane. The residents, many of them, are young, ardent, competitive rock climbers. An intense little bohemia of mountain town athletes. Todd Skinner, their de facto captain, lives in number 10 with his wife, Amy Whistler, also a climber. Skinner, 39, has led 4 of the most notable first free ascents of recent years: Half Dome's northwest face, the Salade Wall of El Capitan, Proboscis in the Yukon, and the Nameless Tower in Pakistan's Karakoram Range. When they woke on that morning, Steve and Amy faced a busy schedule. They had the day off from Wild Iris Mountain Sports, the local outdoor equipment store where both had part-time jobs. Steve's plan was to drive with his yellow lab, Jones, to Dubois, 75 miles north, meet his friend Sam Leitner, and scout some possible new climbing routes at Cartridge Creek. Amy drove her white Toyota Tercel station wagon to the Wind River Fitness Center, another of her part-time employers, and taught an hour-and-a-half kids class in weight training. She was upbeat, says owner Dudley Irvine, though a little high-strung because she had a lot to do. Indeed. 3 days earlier, Amy and Steve had closed on a new house a mile toward the center of town from Lucky Lane, and she was busy organizing a 10K hill climb, scheduled for September 7th. The runners would puff up a series of switchbacks not far out of town and then jump into Fry Lake and finish up with a picnic. We know this. Amy taught the fitness class and picked up the center's recycling. She contacted the phone and electric companies. She stopped in at the Camera Connection on Main and asked owner John Strom about several photographs she planned to submit in a competition. She was 11 days short of her 25th birthday, 13 months into her marriage, a radiant young athlete, small, lithe, determined, thoughtful, even-tempered, trusting. Strom, reserved and bespectacled, remembers that Amy was in running togs, yellow shirt, black shorts, running shoes. That she seemed cheerful and busy. That he sent her to the framing shop upstairs to see about matting. That it was mid-afternoon. She talked with Greg Wagner at Gallery 331 about her photos. He says that in the course of 20 minutes or so, she looked at her watch 2 or 3 times. She left the store. Call it 2:30 p.m. At this point, everything about Amy Wroe Bechtel, her movements, her well-being, her very existence, becomes subject to speculation. At times, the in without knocking, post-collegiate communalism war against Amy's need for privacy and order, according to Joanne Wroe, her mother. Amy wanted a home of her own and couldn't wait to move into the Chris Branch-style house they had just bought, an in-town place with flowers, a lawn, space for a darkroom. In fact, Amy's original plan for July 24th was to drive 3 hours north to her parents' home in Powell, Wyoming, to pick up furniture that her father, Dwayne, had been refinishing for the young couple. Joanne remembers that Amy called the night before and said, "Would you feel really bad if I didn't come tomorrow? I've got about 1,000,000 things to do, and it's my only day off." Joanne, her voice taut, adds, "Later I thought, why didn't we just make her come that day?" Those almost moments. They're the things you think about. Steve Bechtel says he returned from his rendezvous with Sam Leitner about 4:30 that afternoon to find the house empty. He and Amy were not in the habit of leaving notes about their whereabouts, and anyway, Steve had returned earlier than he'd planned. No reason for alarm. After a bit, he spoke with Todd Skinner and Amy Whistler next door, but they hadn't seen Amy since midday. He turned down an invitation to go for pizza with some of the Lucky Lane bunch, and waited. Had she gone climbing? No, her gear was still in the house. Had she gone to take some photographs? No, her camera was in the house. Her jeans and t-shirt were on the bedroom floor, and her running shoes were gone. At about 10 p.m., he called her parents to see if perhaps Amy had driven there on the spur of the moment. When they asked him if anything was wrong, Steve, who later said that he was starting to worry at this point, replied with a casual white lie, "No." Skinner and Whistler had gone to the 8:45 p.m. showing of Con Air, and they arrived home around 11 o'clock to find that Amy still wasn't back. By this time, Steve had called the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, which sent 2 deputies to the house, alerted the night shift, and began to organize a search and rescue team to head out at daybreak. Skinner and Whistler, meanwhile, went to look for Amy's car. They drove downtown, turned right at the Safeway, and followed what's known locally as the Loop Road, a 30-mile affair through the Shoshone National Forest. At about 1 in the morning, Whistler used her cell phone to call Steve. They had found Amy's white Toyota Tercel station wagon at a place called Burnt Gulch, up in the mountains about 45 minutes from town. The car was unlocked. The keys were under Amy's to-do list on the passenger seat, next to her $120 sunglasses. Her wallet was not in the car. Nothing, except Amy's absence and the wallet's absence, she never carried it running, seemed awry. It was as if she had simply parked the car and stepped away for a breath of night air. Steve and his friend Kirk Billings grabbed lanterns, a sleeping bag, and matches and drove to Burnt Gulch. The little group arrowed flashlights past tree trunks, into blurry undergrowth. They called and called Amy's name, were answered with wind through the trees. They summoned more searchers. Long before dawn and the arrival of the official search party. Steve and Amy met at the University of Wyoming in Laramie in December 1991, took exercise physiology classes together in the spring, and were dating by the fall of 1992. Amy is the youngest of 4 closely spaced siblings, allies and friends during their growing up years. Their father, Dwayne Wroe, 66, is a retired city administrator. Joanne Wroe, 12 years younger than her husband, quiet-voiced, is a dark-haired version of her 3 tow-headed daughters. She can seem tentative, forthcoming, and insightful, almost in the same breath. She worked as a teacher of handicapped preschoolers for many years and now substitutes in the Powell. Getting lost or injured near Lander is like having your house catch fire next to the fire station. Scores of rescuers, fit and mountain-wise, live within a rifle shot of City Hall. Amy's disappearance prompted an all-out response from the county's search and rescue volunteers, many of whom are Knowles staff and students, from Lander's extended climbing community, and from Amy and Steve's family members and a number of their college friends. By the weekend, the company of searchers grew to nearly 200. Investigators had discovered, on the bottom of the to-do list found in Amy's car, a milepost description of landmarks that she apparently jotted down, while referring to her odometer, along the first section of the proposed 10K race route, one more indication that Amy herself drove the Toyota up into the mountains before she disappeared. Therefore the search centered on the upper sections of the Loop Road, which begins as a paved highway flanked by ranchettes on the immediate outskirts of Lander. It parallels the Popo Aggie River through Sinks Canyon State Park, where visitors can watch the river vanish into a mountain cave and then walk a quarter-mile to watch it emerge at a quiet pond called the Rise of the Sinks. Beyond Sinks Canyon, the pavement turns to gravel and switchbacks, rising 1,500 feet in 6 miles to Fry Lake, the hill climb Amy was scoping out for her 10K. Still heading up through the Shoshone National Forest, the road passes campgrounds, firewood gathering areas, Louie Lake, snowmobile and hiking trailheads. It crests above 9,000 feet and then descends to connect with Wyoming 28 near the skeletal mining hamlets of Atlantic City and South Pass City. The loop road is essentially a horseshoe tipped on its ends. A vehicle has one way in, one way out. During the day, traffic is sporadic but not infrequent. At night, the loop feels very empty. About halfway along the road, in the westward shadow of Indian Ridge, the loop passes through a fire-thinned forest of lodgepole pines. A rutted side road used by firewood cutters heads off into the trees toward Freak Mountain. This is Burnt Gulch, the place where Skinner and Whistler found Amy's tercel. In the days that followed, searchers painstakingly staked out and scoured roughly 20 square miles around Amy's car. They almost literally combed the 5 square mile area closest to the Toyota. They walked, 4 abreast, the length of the loop. Horses joined the hunt, and then the cadaver dogs and the National Guard. ATVs scampered over the land. A search plane buzzed overhead. Helicopters, including one equipped with infrared sensors, thwacked over the mountains for hours, days. It went on from dawn to dusk for more than a week. She should have been found. If she had been attacked by a mountain lion or a bear, searchers should have found disheveled underbrush, scraps of clothing, blood, remains. If she had become injured or lost, the searchers, who went everywhere she could have managed to take herself, should have come upon her, and come upon her fast. The first day, the second day, the 5th day. Searchers returned to camp exhausted, pained, and baffled. There was not a snip of cloth, a drop of blood, a single verifiable track, a sign of a scuffle, anything to indicate unambiguously that Amy was physically present, alive or dead, on the mountain. There were only a car, some keys, sunglasses, and a to-do list, with 4 of its 13 items checked off. 5 days after Amy disappeared, when the search turned into a full-blown criminal investigation, when 25 FBI agents arrived from Denver and Virginia and from elsewhere in Wyoming, set up shop in the sheriff's office, and began to question anybody who knew anything about the young woman who seemed to have evaporated from their midst. Landerites reacted with fresh shock, followed by the scramble to impose some kind of logic on an inexplicable event. Very quickly, everyone seemed to have an opinion. A month has gone by. Thousands of man-hours have been expended on generating publicity and following up on the hundreds of tips that have come in. By now, Steve and his friends have learned to discriminate between the promising and the ludicrous. 2 or 3 dozen psychics have offered their services. Jim and Wendy Gibson, owners of Landers Pronghorn Lodge, have told investigators they passed a slender blonde woman wearing dark shorts running in the same direction. They were traveling on the loop road, away from town, late on the afternoon of July 24th. It is the end of August, then early September. Search headquarters has moved from the mountains and into town, and the taciturn, professionally noncommittal FBI agents, after an investigative blitz that lasted a week and a half, have returned to Denver and Cheyenne and Quantico. A room in the sheriff's office has become the new command post. The walls are thick with timelines and topographic maps. In one corner sit 3 computers, in another, a small table with a pair of size 8 Adidas Trail Response running shoes and a mannequin torso wearing a Yellowstone monkey t-shirt and black running shorts. The concrete world of a physical search, gullies, cliffs, thick copses, has given way to the more abstract realm of an investigation, theories, networks, possible sightings, criminal profiles. The vast majority of violent crimes against women are committed by a friend, an acquaintance, or a relative of the victim. The authorities quickly became interested in Steve and in a small number of men who had exhibited particular interest in Amy or her running career, but no one has emerged as anything approaching a clear suspect. Sam Leitner, the climber whom Steve drove to Dubois to meet on July 24th, corroborated Steve's account of his whereabouts that day. Still, no third party as yet has provided firm independent corroboration of the 2 climbers' account. Meanwhile, Steve Bechtel and Amy's friends and relatives are doing what they compel themselves to do, acting as they have trained themselves to act. They have converted Todd Skinner's garage on Lucky Lane into a search headquarters. $10,000 reward. The group has mailed out or directed satellite volunteers to mail out more than 80,000 flyers. Addresses are gleaned from email chain letters and internet phone directories, bars, pawn shops, convenience stores, truck stops, motels, bus lines, adopt a highway sponsors, film processors. There is an Amy website, more than 200 other websites have links to it, and there is a goal of 1,000 links. The search is out of the woods, onto the computer screen. Early on, the authorities, the FBI, Chief Investigator Dave King, Sheriff Larry Matthews, and many townspeople, and even Amy's parents, took the position that if Steve was innocent, he had nothing to lose by sitting for a lie detector test. Steve, most of his intimates, and his lawyer, Kent Spence, stepbrother of one of Steve's climbing acquaintances and son of that Spence, Jerry, felt quite differently. They said that Steve had already submitted to 4 formal interviews with the investigators, and they pointed to study after study about the unreliability of polygraph tests. Further, Steve and Spence accused the cops of picking at straws in the wind, of relying on profiles of perpetrators, of wasting their energy badgering and frightening Steve when they could be tracking down potentially fruitful leads and suspects. The FBI in their usual sensitive manner attacked Steve Bechtel when they became frustrated with their failure to come up with any clues. Spence said shortly after taking on Steve as a client. They pointed their cannons at him and accused him of being involved, when they had no evidence whatsoever. In mid-October, the FBI and the local investigators, having dropped their demand that Steve Bechtel submit to a polygraph test, asked him to come in for another general interview, but on the advice of Kent Spence, his attorney, he declined. "They're just trying to poke, and hope that they get something," Spence said recently. "They've made it look like Steve has something to hide." The Bechtel case was on the docket of a grand jury, convened in Casper in late November. Grand jury proceedings are unnervingly secret affairs. None of the officials involved would comment on the deliberations, though one of the subpoenaed witnesses said that the jury was mostly interested in a former acquaintance of Amy's whom authorities have been unable to locate. The reward for information leading to the recovery of Amy Wroe Bechtel now stands at $100,000. Early storms arrived, left deer hunters, objects of an intensive, dedicated, but fruitless flurry of "Have you seen Amy?" Publicity came and went. The loop road became impassable and was closed.